Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. I think it's safe to say after this week, the Democratic Party pretty fired up. It was just a month ago that a lot of the party felt adrift and demoralized and anguished over a race that really did seem to be sliding kind of inexorably towards a Trump victory and a second Trump presidency. Then, of course, the switch, as it's become to known. President Joe Biden bowed out of the race, kicking off a heady month that closed out this week with an electrifying, unifying, and yes, joyful party convention in Chicago. And where last night, Vice President Kamala Harris officially accepted the Democratic nomination for president in a speech that I have to say really just surpassed even high expectations. She met the moment, she laid out the stakes, and really specifically reached out to every part of a divided America. Everything you need to know about the choice of presidential candidates was kind of on display in their very different convention speeches, with Harris serving up this sort of formidable, targeted, crisp, concrete appeals to court-specific groups on America with specific messages in a speech that somehow brought a coherent policy and an optimistic worldview to all those different groups. And with Trump being Trump and dashing the hopes of every campaign insider who promised reporters he would pivot to being a unifier.
Our nation with this election has a precious, fleeting opportunity to move past the bitterness, cynicism, and divisive battles of the past, a chance to chart a new way forward.
The prosecutor and the fake documents case against me were totally unconstitutional. They should drop these partisan witch hunts, which I have been going through for approximately 8 years.
You can always trust me to put country above party and self, to hold sacred America's fundamental principles, from the rule of law to free and fair elections, to the peaceful transfer of power.
I am trying to buy your vote. I'll be honest about that.
In many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man.
Has anyone seen Silence of the Lambs? The late, great Hannibal Lecter. He'd love to have you for dinner.
But the consequences of putting Donald Trump back in the White House are extremely serious.
And then we had that horrible, horrible result that we'll never let happen again. The election result, we're never going to let that happen again. They used COVID.
In case that contrast isn't enough, you could also consider Trump's nervous, nonstop posting to social media throughout the Democratic convention, like when he accused vice presidential nominee and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz of stealing valor. Not military valor, no, but football valor. Walz was an assistant coach, not a coach, the former president shouted into a keyboard. He was an assistant coach. They still won the state title. It's incredible. Democrats are successfully making these kind of majoritarian appeals, broad swath of America, and Republicans are falling apart, begging Trump to stick to non-weird campaign talking points, flailing to find an attack on Harris and Walz that sticks, pointing fingers at each other over the Project 2025, its radioactive effect on voters. And here's the thing. All that's true. Democrats are still running as the underdogs. Threading a needle, the delicate message that basically says, and you saw it all 4 days, including last night, we represent the majority, the best of this country. We want to invite people in, but we're actually behind, and we have to work our butts off to win this thing. And that's because that's true. Every level of the Democratic Party understands the Electoral College is stacked against them, that they need a convincing popular vote win of millions upon millions of votes to overcome the red state advantage in electors. Remember, Joe Biden won 8 million more votes than Donald Trump. 8 million more votes 4 years ago. If just a few thousand votes had gone the other way in Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona, he would have lost the Electoral College. As one political scientist pointed out after the most recent redistricting nationwide, it's impossible to find any kind of close election result that's better for Democrats in 2024 than in 2020. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is out on the campaign trail telling his most devoted supporters, don't sweat the actual voting too much.
Our primary focus is not to get out the vote. It's to make sure they don't cheat. Because we have all the votes you need. You can see it. Every House along the way has signs, Trump, 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 Trump fans, Trump fans.
Votes. Schmotes. He doesn't care about the votes. He only cares about counting them in a way that lets him win. And yes, he can say that because he's fundamentally heading up an authoritarian, anti-democratic movement. 2020 was the proof of that. But also because Republicans know the electoral playing field is tilted towards them. It's the reason Trump can pick a running mate like J.D. Vance, who pleases the base but repels suburban voters. It's why Republicans can double down with convention speaker slots for the CEO of UFC, Dana White, and Hulk Hogan. And it's why Tim Walz is giving Democrats locker room pep talks like they are a team that is losing late in the fourth quarter.
We're down a field goal, but we're on offense and we've got the ball. We're driving down the field. And boy, do we have the right team.
So right now for Democrats in 2024, it is all about killing complacency and winning enough votes, and not just to win the Electoral College, but to win big enough so that when Donald Trump inevitably tries to cheat, when he inevitably tries to call in favors from MAGA officials in state houses on election boards, which he's going to do, when he looks for an assist from the Supreme Court that just created a special presidential immunity case just for him, when all that happens, the reality of his loss is so undeniable, it can be tamper-proof shared reality.
In the NFL, we had a term for guys like Donald Trump and my opponent, Ted Cruz. Me guys. You know the type. Talk a big game, only care about themselves, but you don't want to be stuck with them at a barbecue. The truth is, America has never been about me. We will protect and restore reproductive freedom. We will secure the border. We'll protect Medicare and Social Security. And we'll turn the page and write a new chapter for this country and elect Kamala Harris to be the next president and beat Ted Cruz.
Congressman Colin Allred last night with a brutally honest and important message for the me guys out there, people like Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, that despite their efforts against it, democracy is and always has been about us, we the people. Joining us now, the aforementioned Democratic Congressman Colin Allred of Texas, fresh off that address to the Hall in primetime last night. How was that? Well, tell me what that experience was like.
Hey, Nicole, thanks for having me. Yeah, it was great, and it was a unique experience for me. What I wanted to do in the short bit of time I had was introduce myself, talk about how important this election is, but also that we all know guys like Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. Anybody who's been on a team, anybody who's had to work in a group setting knows what I'm talking about. There's those guys who take all the credit, who don't do any of the work, who you can't count on in a crisis, and they're the guys who hold you back. And you can't have too many of them in any kind of team setting. In the NFL, locker rooms have a way of kind of churning those guys out. You see them bouncing around the league, going from team to team, even though they're talented. In the Congress, we have reached too many of them. And for Texas, we can't afford 6 more years of a guy like Ted Cruz who only cares about himself, but also when he's part of his self-interest is taking away the rights of Texans. And a lot of this convention was about stories of Ted Cruz's Texas, where Texas women were telling their stories about losing their fundamental freedoms and their rights to making their own decisions about their body. Where we're talking about how he has prevented us from securing the border, how we have to protect Medicare and Social Security. This is what Ted Cruz has made us into. And this convention in a lot of ways was about that.
It's such an interesting point. I watched every minute of it, and I didn't think about that. But we also heard from a Uvalde mom. So this is Ted Cruz's America that we're all living in when it comes to doing nothing about gun safety, something that upwards of 70–80% of all Americans want. Kate Cox was the Texas woman who spoke during the roll call about not receiving abortion health care. Again, 76% of Americans supported Roe, and he took that away. And his role in stopping the Biden-Harris administration from doing anything on immigration. I wonder if you can speak to the effort by the Harris candidacy to depict these things not as masculine or strong, but as cowardly and weak and small.
Yeah. Well, I think that they were pursuing the right path there. And, for us in Texas, we're used to having independent leaders who put Texas first. We have a long tradition of this. You know this, Nicole. And in a lot of ways, Ted Cruz is a follower. He's a follower who just is trying to kind of, feed off of the scraps of, his leader, who in many cases is doing things that are not in Texas interest. And so what I've always tried to be is somebody who, listen, I'm a Democrat, obviously, but I'll stand up to my party when I think that we're wrong. And what we have to do is also put these folks in the right context. That for us, we don't have to be embarrassed by our senator. We can get a new one. We don't have to have a small senator who's a follower who doesn't get things done for us. We can get a new one. We can have a fourth-generation Texan who will care about all of us. And that's what this campaign has been about. I think that's obviously what we see the Harris campaign talking about, is that, yes, Ted Cruz was part of the effort to overturn the election in 2020. He was one of the architects of that. And so he's dangerous, but they're also small.
What is happening in Texas? I've had Beto O'Rourke on twice in the last couple weeks. I feel like he knows, precinct by precinct, that state inside and out, and he swears something's happening in Texas. What do your internal polls show?
Listen, this is a neck-and-neck race, and I know folks back home just need to understand that. I know who we are as Texans, and I know my state. I'm a fourth-generation Texan, born and raised here in Dallas. My family's from Brownsville. I went to college at Baylor. I know who we are, and we're not who Ted Cruz says we are. And what we've had happen is that we've had extreme leaders like him who've taken away our rights and whose rhetoric has now become policy. And so, yes, it was Kate Cox, who's a friend of mine, and Kate's going to be with me tomorrow at an event that we're doing here in Dallas. But also Amanda Zurawski and her husband Josh, who were telling their story about how they were denied the care they needed when she was going through miscarriage, and now she may never be able to welcome a child. Amanda and Josh are friends of mine, and Texans are hearing these stories and talking about these stories. And we're going to stand up for the real Texas, because if there's one thing I know about us, it's that we believe in freedom. And this is not it. You're not free when Ted Cruz is in your doctor's office when you're having these incredibly important discussions. And so, this is what this is going to all be about. And I need folks from all around to understand what's happening here in Texas and to be a part of it, and to go to colinallred.com and help us out. I know that you might not have understood my state in the past, but trust me, we've raised $1 million in the last 24 hours. Okay, we're doing incredibly well. We're going to beat Ted Cruz. And when we do, it's not just going to win for the Democratic Party. It's going to win for Texas.
Do you think Kamala Harris has a chance to flip Texas?
I don't know, but I know this. I really mean this, Nicole. I know that we're not a state that believes in extremism. We're not a state of extremists. I've represented President Bush, for the last 4 years in Congress, and I know you worked for him. And he's somebody who, in a lot of ways, I've known my whole life, growing up in Dallas when he was with the Rangers and then governor and then president. And they've gone so far from that version of the Texas kind of Republican values that I grew up around, that I went to folks at Baylor with, that they've left those far, far behind. And that's why there are so many Texas Republicans who do support me. That's why I got elected in a district here in Dallas that was a traditionally Republican district by folks who had voted for George W. Bush. And that's why now also on November 5th, I think we'll see a coalition, not just of Democrats, but of independents and Republicans as well, getting rid of Ted Cruz. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, there's something happening here, and it's going to have impacts up and down the ballot. But for us in Texas, the singular choice is that we have to choose who's going to represent us for the next 6 years until 2030, and we can't have that be Ted Cruz again.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. To your point, the Republican who most sees the world the way George W. Bush certainly did and the way he governed is Adam Kinzinger. And the only convention he was invited to speak at was the Democratic convention. Fascinating times, well. Yeah. I'm sure.
We have to dispense of this piece of news because it's a piece of news, right? RFK Jr. Leaving the race, endorsing Donald Trump, bear cubs, brainworms, all of it. Okay, what do you make of it? Because he was an unserious man, too, sadly, because he got a great family legacy and he could have been a serious guy, but he chose to be an unserious guy. He was never going to be president. He still carried on about how the fact that he might actually still be president of the United States. It's a lot of BS. But what do you make of this whole development?
Well, Donald Trump objects to being called weird. So what does he do? He picks J.D. Vance, who seems to have been made at a replicant factory on Friday afternoon when they were trying to get off of work. And then he picks, he goes and takes this endorsement from, one of the sadder figures in American public life, a guy who clearly is just broken. But, the first time, think about it. You have two candidates that are supporting Putin, two candidates who would like to end the war in Ukraine so that Russia could take Ukraine. And you have two candidates who are against any mandatory vaccines in schools. So that's the pro-polio group. I mean, it is just as nutty as it can be, and it will continue to dismay me that other members of my former party don't call it out. It's just crazy.
Well, there was this, the campaign and his running mate said this thing about how they were going to draw votes from everybody, but what they realized is that they weren't going to draw any votes from Biden at the time, and now Kamala. Of course not. They're conspiracy theorists. It's a very narrow band. The Democratic Party came out and put a statement out saying it's not going to get Donald Trump more votes, and I kind of agree with that. He's got that locked up. Like, you don't need the guy, the conspiracy theorist, to get you more votes if you're Donald Trump. You've actually got that constituency locked up well.
Yeah, and the dirty little secrets of endorsements is that they rarely, if ever, matter. Nobody really cares. And I say that as someone who spent, a good part of my life trying to get people to endorse a candidate I was working for, but it never really matters. It doesn't change your race, and this won't change the race. What's fascinating about the Trump campaign is it's rare that you see a campaign, basically it's having like a nervous breakdown in public. It has no idea what to do, and it's flailing around. And I don't know how they get out of this, because they don't really have a compelling message that Donald Trump could articulate. I don't think this race is going to be on a left-right axis.
No.
I think it's fine to talk about the economy. I think the Harris campaign is doing all the right stuff. But at the end of the day, like 2022, this isn't going to be about inflation or gas prices. This is going to be about Donald Trump.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Here's a question. I kind of agree with you about endorsements. I'm always fascinated. A newspaper that's always endorsed a Democrat comes out and endorses the Democrat. A newspaper that's always endorsed a Republican. And once in a while that breaks. But I agree with you. I'm not going to make my decision based on a newspaper. Do the Republicans who come out and speak and endorse Kamala Harris, does it create a permission structure amongst rank-and-file Republicans to say, I'm a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I don't share a ton of views with Democrats, but there's a permission structure now for me to say, I'm voting for Harris now because of some dangers of Donald Trump. Does that do anything, do you think, or you still think it doesn't mean much?
I think having someone up there saying it out loud is important. And look, I can't tell you how much I admire Jeff Duncan and Adam Kinzinger. These are people that had a lot to lose in politics, rising stars in the party, and they chose to do what the rest of the party should have done, but very few did, which is actually stick by what they said that they believed in. It's tremendously courageous to do this, and so rare in politics. So, yeah, I think it helps. I mean, look, at the Lincoln Project, we focus on these voters.
Yeah.
The soft Republican voters, the soft Dems. These were the last to join Trump in 2016, and usually the last to join are the first to leave in politics. I think that gap is widened a good bit since Dobbs. And just the sort of anger and ugliness that comes from what used to be a conservative movement, the way they attacked Governor Walz's son. This is just crazy. Horrible human beings expressing themselves in public. And it's repugnant to the majority of people. In
fairness to all conservatives, that was BS on every level. That's not a conservative thing, to attack people's children who are not involved in politics, or people's children who are neurodivergent. I just don't want to paint Republicans with that brush, because I think a lot of people with common sense thought that was BS.
How many Republicans publicly called them out for doing it?
Yeah, very few.
Very few.
Very few.
And that's what's so disappointing.
So a vice presidential candidate walks into a donut shop. No, that's not the start of a joke. That is actually what J.D. Vance did yesterday.
Hey, how are you? Good, good. The zoo has come to town. I'm sorry, man. Okay, yeah. She doesn't want to be on film, guys, so just cut her out of anything. Appreciate that, man. I'm JD Vance. I'm running for vice president. Good to see you.
Okay. Usually when a political candidate makes one of these little pit stops on the campaign trail, people are excited to see the political candidate. But that is not how it went for J.D. Vance yesterday when he walked into a donut shop in Valdosta, Georgia. It was an awkward beginning, but hey, there was still a chance for him to turn it around, to make eye contact and trot out his folksy charm.
We're going to do 2 dozen.
Okay.
Yep. And just a random assortment of stuff here. How long have you worked here?
I've been here since the beginning of July.
Okay.
For this year.
Okay, good. How about you, sir?
Almost 2 years.
Okay, good. How long is it?
Everything.
Just everything, yeah. I mean, a lot of glazed here, some sprinkle stuff, some of these cinnamon rolls, just whatever makes sense. How long has this place been around?
About 4 years.
About 4 years? Okay. How long have you been here?
A little over 6 months.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's, when we selected this place, I didn't know if it had been here for 20 years or 4 years or, you never know.
You never know. It is perhaps the oldest trick in the book for a political campaign to deploy its candidate to a diner or a donut shop or wherever it is, to make it seem like the candidate is one with the people, and to shake some hands, to kiss some babies, order a few donuts, to make them seem relatable and normal. But normal does not appear to be in J.D. Vance's wheelhouse. But if you would like a lesson in how this kind of campaign stop should be done, here is Kamala Harris's running mate stopping in at a fast food restaurant in Nebraska last weekend.
Sorry to hold things up for you. We really came just to go to runs, and then we did a little rally on the side.
No kidding. Amazing. Amazing. Oh my gosh, I'm such a big fan. I'm from here, right here. I went to school at St. Charles.
Did you really?
Yes. Nebraska.
It's us. So I'm West Point and then Valentine's.
Right, yeah.
You went Shannon State.
Was there runs at West Point?
No.
There's now.
Is that really?
Yes.
Nice to meet you all. Sorry to disrupt your day. In case that we were not going to Nebraska without stopping and getting a run.
No, and we're even taking some home, right?
Taking some back with us.
I think it's the bread consistency. I mean,
Making your own every day?
yeah, get this guy on TV for runs us. Thanks for the work you're doing.
Of course.
Matters.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Pleasure to meet you all. Wow.
If the Trump campaign had an issue with the J.D. Vance and the weird label before Kamala Harris picked Tim Walz, that problem is supersized now that Tim Walz is giving J.D. Vance's weird such a harsh contrast.
He was treated very unfairly by the Democrats. Yeah. He would have beaten Joe Biden in a Democrat primary. I have no doubt about it. And they made it absolutely impossible for him. They made it that you have to get 60, 70% of the vote just to get in. And you know what?
President.
In the end, the Democrats did the same thing to Joe Biden. They threw Joe Biden out of the party.
And that's why we saw a different night tonight.
Mr. President, thank you so
very
much
sir.
for the time. We appreciate that live feedback.
Stay right there. Live edition of Gutfeld is coming up.
Not even the hosts at Fox News last night had an appetite for stream of consciousness Donald Trump, which I guess begs the question, does anyone right now? Joining me is Tim Miller, writer-at-large at The Bulwark and co-host of the Next Level podcast. Tim, when you lose Fox News, who have you got left? What do you make of Trump's behavior last night?
Yeah, I was watching that live, waiting to go on with Jen late night after Kamala's amazing speech, and I'm like, even Martha McCallum's face and Brett Baer's face, it's like, it's like at Christmas when you're trying to get home, you're trying to go see your friends for a drink after Christmas with the family, and your uncle won't stop talking to you, is just shouting in your ear. You're like, all right. He's struggling. All right. He's obviously triggered. He sent, I think, like 30 bleats last night about everything from Tim Walz being an assistant coach to Hunter Biden to how pretty Kamala is. He is really flustered and struggling. And you could see it last night with that call in after the speech.
The Trump-Vance ticket isn't getting any better in terms of its prospects. We played that sound of J.D. Vance in a donut shop in Valdosta, Georgia, and that sound of Tim Walz at a runs in Nebraska. And the contrast between the way in which these two individuals interface with working-class Americans is shocking. What do you think what do you think the entry of Walz does to J.D. Vance's kind of credibility with the working man?
Yeah, it's tough. I hated that you made me watch that whole donut shop video. I mean, I was just suffering from vicarious embarrassment for JD. He's an uncomfortable guy. And I think that the Walz pick, just provides this striking contrast when it comes to who can authentically speak to working people's concerns. J.D. Vance was like this pick where Donald Trump's kid told him, he's like, this guy's really good with working people. They like him. He wrote that book. Like, the reality was, it was mostly like New York liberals that read J.D. Vance's book back in the day. It wasn't working class people. And J.D. Vance left his town and, went to Yale and then went to become a VC. He just is not one of them. Like, it's not natural. It doesn't come naturally to him. And so I think that with Walz on the ticket, like that fakeness and that failure to be an authentic representative of working people has really been accentuated.
I feel like, if the Trump campaign could operate with someone at the top of the ticket who had a bit of self-control, there's a way they could kind of try to dig them out of this. But instead, the Democrats make this big, boisterous argument for inclusion, patriotism, America, and normalcy. Yeah. And how does Trump respond? By going on Fox, ranting about Hunter Biden, all the things that you said, making himself seem even fringier and more sort of self-involved. And here, now we have this viral video of his running mate acting like a complete weirdo in a donut shop, unable to actually put in an order for 24 donuts. How much do you think the entreaties that Democrats made to Republicans in the course of the DNC are going to actually win over some Republican votes?
I think it was a great start. I just thought the thematics, the tributes to patriotism, the substance also, like on foreign policy. I think that Kamala reassured a lot of maybe Nikki Haley voters that didn't know a lot about her foreign policy. So I think both in substance and style, they really hit the mark in reaching this swing group last night. And Trump is just not capable of doing what he needs to do to win those conservative swing voters back, which is be disciplined about painting Kamala as far left, right? And he's just not able to do that. He's going to lash out and be personal instead.
And get kicked off of Fox News. This is where we're at now. Tim Miller, it is always great to get your perspective, my friend. Thank you for your time tonight.
In 1984, the Reverend Jesse Jackson made his first run for president, a seemingly unlikely bid by a black American 12 years after Shirley Chisholm mounted her bid for the Democratic nomination. Surprising everyone, he won 4 primaries and brought 358 delegates to the Democratic National Convention that year in San Francisco. Jackson tried again in 1988, this time winning 13 states and 1,023 delegates, nearly enough to take the nomination from Michael Dukakis. The people working behind the scenes to get Reverend Jackson the nomination included 5 young black women, Mignon Moore, Donna Brazile, Leah Daughtry, Tina Flournoy, and Yolanda Caraway. They called themselves the Colored Girls. 40 years later, at the Democratic National Convention in Jackson's hometown of Chicago, we've come full circle, with Reverend Jackson receiving his flowers surrounded by fellow civil rights leaders, and the Colored Girls, now veteran Democratic strategists, still behind the scenes, but now running the show. Yolanda Caraway is principal at the Caraway Group consulting firm. Tina Flournoy was chief of staff to VP Kamala Harris from 2021 to 2022. Bishop Leah Daughtry is presiding prelate of the House of the Lord Churches and co-founder of Black Church PAC. Donna Brazile is the former chair of the DNC and ran Al Gore's campaign. And Mignon Moore is the chair of this year's Democratic National Convention. I got to talk to all 5 of the Colored Girls during the DNC in Chicago about their own journeys, as well as the journey of the Democratic Party from Jesse Jackson in 1984 to Kamala Harris 4 decades later. The Color Girls are assembled before me. It is such an honor to be able to talk to you ladies. You are such icons inside of not just the Democratic Party, but in American politics and in American civic life. So thank you for being here. I want to start by referring you all to a moment, bringing you back to a moment that happened Monday, night one of the convention, when Reverend Jesse Jackson was brought out into the crowd. He received his ovations from the crowd, and then he was brought up on stage with some of the activists he trained, including Reverend Sharpton. And he was able to receive it was a good 2 minutes of just applause. And I just want to ask what that meant to you all as people who came up under him in the movement. And I am going to start with you, Yolanda. How did that feel?
You're going to make me start crying again. Because that's what I did Monday night.
You're allowed to cry.
It was so, I don't even know how to describe it. It was an amazing feeling. You know, I'm so proud to have worked for him. I learned almost everything I knew from him.
Not only did he do so much as an activist, he did so much as a party insider. Once he got inside and opened the door, he made sure the door stayed open for everybody else. The number of black people who became members of the DNC because of something that he negotiated has led to all of us being involved in the DNC. So many other people, electeds around the country. He opened the door to the party institution for so many, not just black people, people of color, people who had been not at the table are there because of Reverend Jackson.
Bishop Leah?
My very first presidential campaign was 1984 for Reverend Jesse Jackson. I was a student in New Hampshire, and he asked me to help run that part of New Hampshire for his campaign. The first convention, we were like, huh? We do what? What's a credential? And so he swung his door open so wide to bring us into a process we hadn't experienced before. And then he stayed inside and taught us how to be insiders, changing the party's rules. And so when he came out that night, I cried. It was just accolades overdue, and it's really not enough that this party could ever do to thank him.
Donna?
I had tears of joy and celebration, but also a lifelong commitment to change. What he instilled in us, we have to continue to instill in others. What he provided us, we have to give to others. Everything about Reverend Jackson was truly about making sure all of his people, the rainbow, all of us, including women, he recognized women's leadership before some women recognized themselves as leaders.
We knew that in many ways, many of us, not just us, but many of us, including President Obama, including Hillary Clinton, including our now fabulous nominee, they all stood on the shoulders that he had paid. When they brought him out onto that stage, I don't think there was a dry eye in there. What he instilled in us and all of us, and I think it's a thread through who we are as color girls. People think it's about color. For us, it's always been about our value system, and a lot of that he brought to us because he made us believe that the titles didn't matter, but what did matter is how you can open the doors and swing them wide open and make sure that everybody has a seat at the table. And the thing that I think I take away from his movement, his leadership, is don't go into the room seeing who's in the room. Go into the room seeing who's not in the room. That's why they call me a y'all come.
And fast forward 40 years, now we are at a convention at which the nominee is a black woman. And I don't think that a lot of people know how many black women are empowered in the Democratic Party behind the scenes. And so as much as you are willing to talk about it, I would love for you all to give us some insights into what the making of the nomination of Vice President Harris to be the nominee, because it didn't just happen by accident.
Well, it starts with Joe Biden.
Yeah, that was just
It starts with Joe Biden. And this is another emotional. Joe Biden talked to us before he made his selection.
That's right.
We actually talked to Joe Biden about what we thought she would add to the ticket and the values she represented.
What we do is learn the rules, make sure they follow the rules, because many times the rules change when you get different things in the process. But the one thing we have always prided ourselves in is making sure we get in there and understand how to move these chess pieces. We try to make sure we understand the rules that we're playing by, and that's what the vice president had the benefit of. We understood the rules, and they couldn't change them
during
on
that
us.
period, the period when the president was really deciding what path he would take. We knew a couple of things, and Donna was very vocal about this, that if he decided that he was not going forward, no one was going to go around the vice president or through the vice president.
That's right.
Period.
I want to get everybody's take on the convention. Senator, I turn to you first.
I think it was, for me, bittersweet because we thought we were going to elect a woman in 2016. That didn't happen. But that woman stepped up to the plate and hit it out of the park and passed that torch. Everybody talked about Biden passing a torch. Guess what? Hillary passed the torch to a new generation of women leaders. And it was exciting to see it. She was eloquent. I thought she gave an incredible speech. And it was a moment, I think, that will go down in history as we look at women politicians and women leaders.
John, what do you think?
Yeah, speaking of women leaders, I was fascinated at the response, the warm reception, the overwhelmingly warm reception to former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who herself passed a torch to Hakeem Jeffries, now the House Minority Leader, just a couple of years ago. There was some question after she basically pushed Biden out of the race what the response was going to be from these delegates, and they loved her. Her speech was not the most thrilling of the group, but she did prove herself once again, both the godmother of the Democratic Party and also the godfather.
Exactly. She was the godmother and godfather. VP Harris's speech was her chance to introduce herself to the country and explain to voters why they should choose her. We only know her as the VP. Molly, do you think people can now see her as president?
Yeah, and in fact, I think there were a lot of intentional things that were done to present her as president. Like, she stood between two flags, and her speech had a lot of these kind of State of the Union-like qualities to it. I also thought that what she did that was really smart was that she really made Democrats, and this is a larger theme of the convention, there are a lot of things that Republicans have abandoned with Trumpism, and Democrats have sort of picked them up, right? Patriotism, football, the case that these are proud Americans, right? And you saw a lot of these themes, but I thought that largely her speech was really prosecuting this case yet again. And she said, there was this great line where she said, I represent the people, right? I am for the people. And I thought that was really important.
Tremaine, diversity is a main tenet of the Democratic Party. But when we saw VP Harris speak last night, she made no mention of the fact that she would be the first woman president. That had to be by design. What do you think of the fact that she didn't say anything about it?
Well, I think she came ready for business, and she comported herself that way. But when you look at the audience and you see who was in attendance, I couldn't help but think about my favorite poet, Langston Hughes, who had a poem, I Too Sing America, a retort to Walt Whitman's I Hear America Singing. And that reclaiming of patriotism, that reclaiming of what it means to be an American. And we talked a lot about the idea of passing that torch and the Obamas kind of being a bridge between the Pelosi's and the Clintons and the Bidens to see a Wes Moore, to see Jasmine Crockett from Texas doing their thing, the DJs, the roll call. She didn't need to project any sense of history being claimed or reclaimed. It was evident every step of the way. And to see that many American flags, for a long time, the American flag has become synonymous with something other than this embrace. It became something similar to not to say the Confederate flag, but for many people, a scary symbol. But to reclaim that flag and to have that lineup of people there, I think that said everything that we need to know about this idea of what this moment means, especially for a diversifying America.
Molly, Republicans like to say everything is about DEI, DEI. So do you think it was by design that she made no mention of the fact that she'd be the first female president, the first black female president? Because you know that is a top thing they'll be talking about.
Well, you know, she didn't have to say it, because when you're walking around those halls, those women and the delegates they felt it. And I got so many of these women coming over to me, and it was palpable. You know, they didn't need to say it. She just was doing it. And that, I think, is the real change from, you know, Hillary Clinton that was a path that Hillary Clinton cut. And we now see women do this. And so she didn't need to say it. She just was there. But you saw just an infectious enthusiasm among the delegates and the women volunteering. And it was that was really moving and exciting.
Heidi, I know you're going to have a response to this. In the Wall Street Journal, Peggy Noonan wrote that Democrats stole the idea of faith and patriotism, which are traditionally Republican themes. You think they stole them?
I didn't know that faith and patriotism were Republican. I think they stole that from us. Yeah. You know, if you think about it, Steph, you know, they have painted us as unpatriotic, as not caring about our faith. And that's never been true. And this convention hopefully stopped that. And we should all thank Adam Kinzinger, because when he stood up and he said, guess what? I'm a Republican. I now know Democrats, and they're very patriotic. And you see it over and over again through service in the country, in the military. But, you know, I think to suggest that we stole it from the Republicans, you know, is that something that they own? They don't own the flag. They don't own patriotism. And they certainly don't own my church. And so, too bad.
Heidi, what is your take on the VP candidate, Tim Walz? Freedom, family, and football. Those were certainly his themes Wednesday night.
Well, I suppose they're going to accuse us of taking football. Let me tell you, I've been a very strong advocate for Tim Walz, because I believe that one of the reasons why we haven't been successful in the Democratic Party becoming a majority party is because we've ignored rural America. And I know they think they raised this issue with J.D. Vance. He hasn't lived in rural America since he was 18. This is a guy who taught in a high school, small high school. This is a guy who coached football. When he is presented to the American public, he's the most popular in terms of favorability of the four people on the presidential ticket. I think he was an excellent choice.
John, how much is Tim Walz and his whole persona making Republicans unravel? Because the most damning thing they could say about him this week is that he lied. He was not a football coach. He was an assistant football coach. Maybe only like defensive coordinator.
I mean, I don't know. That's like saying somebody wasn't a broadcaster; they were just on TV, right? Like, I mean, it's ridiculous. I think they are generally worried about the enthusiasm, the excitement the Democrats have for their ticket. I don't think it's limited to Tim Walz. I think they look at Kamala Harris and they say, "This is scary." Donald Trump thinks she is scary. Part of the reason is connected to why she didn't talk about becoming the first woman president, which is, there's no imagination gap here. You can look at her standing there in front of the Democratic convention. You can look at her standing in front of a podium as vice president or in national security meetings when you see the pictures come out of there. There's no imagination gap between Kamala Harris and the presidency. And that is something that is different in my lifetime, in your lifetime, in Tremaine's lifetime, in Senator Heitkamp's, and in Molly's lifetime. There's no difficulty looking at a candidate who happens to be a woman, who happens to be black, and saying to yourself, that person could be in the presidency. And with Kamala Harris specifically, she carries herself with such dignity and poise, that I think that's double the case.
Senator, going back to patriotism, there were so many chants of USA, USA. If you turned down the volume and squinted real close, you might have thought you were at the RNC. Right. And we are seeing VP Harris present this unified party, but we're hearing a real centrist presentation. Do you think her policies follow?
I absolutely think her policies are pro-family, pro-middle class. Now, you can call that progressive, you can call it liberal, you can call it conservative, but the difference really is how we believe government should intervene. You know, I always say the difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party is the Republican Party believes in investing in institutions, and the Democratic Party invests your tax dollars in human beings and Americans and expect that that's going to make the country stronger. And that's what you see in her policies. You know, it is incredible. And Steph, if I can just make this point really quickly, I think there was all this anticipation about how the convention delegates would respond. I think the moment that the Jewish parents showed up, whose son is currently hostage in Gaza, that parent said, I thought it would be at best neutral and hostile. And when she heard the crowd chanting, bring them home, she just fell. I mean, she, you know, and with just such an appreciation that we aren't what you think we are. And that's the really great thing about this convention. It showed the Democratic Party of compassion, action, joyfulness, and yes, patriotism and faith.